The rust bucket wheezed like an old man climbing stairs as Jenna Torres fought with the controls. Warning lights painted her sweat-streaked face in angry reds and yellows while the ship's ancient engines coughed and sputtered their dying breaths. Through the viewport, the mining station Kepler-7 grew larger, its collection of docking bays and industrial modules looking like a mechanical flower blooming against the star-scattered void. "Come on, baby," Jenna muttered, coaxing the ship toward the nearest docking bay. Just a little further. The rust bucket had been her home for 3 years, ever since she'd scraped together enough credits to buy the ancient cargo hauler from a desperate trader on Mars. It wasn't much to look at: scarred hull plating, mismatched thruster arrays, and a navigation system that predated the Galactic Trade Accords, but it was hers. More importantly, it kept her moving, hauling small cargo loads between the outer rim stations where questions weren't asked and backgrounds weren't checked. The ship shuddered violently as she engaged the docking clamps. Through the metal walls, she could hear the disturbing grinding noise that had started 3 days ago and gotten progressively worse. Whatever was wrong with her hyperdrive, it was beyond the patch jobs and jury-rigged solutions that had kept the rust bucket flying this long. Kepler-7 wasn't exactly a first-choice destination. The mining station orbited a dead planet in a system most respectable traders avoided. Its reputation attracted smugglers, pirates, and others who preferred to conduct business away from the watchful eyes of the Terran Colonial Authority. But it was the closest port when her hyperdrive started acting up, and beggars couldn't be choosers. The docking bay's atmosphere cycled with a hiss, and Jenna gathered her tool kit and what little currency she had left. The station's artificial gravity felt heavier than Earth standard, making her boots ring against the metal decking as she made her way toward the main corridor. The air tasted of recycled oxygen and industrial lubricants, with an underlying hint of something she couldn't quite identify. Kepler-7's central hub bustled with activity despite the late hour. Miners in grimy work suits rubbed shoulders with traders in expensive synthetics, while maintenance droids wheeled between them carrying supplies and equipment. The diversity of species was remarkable. She spotted the distinctive blue skin of Altarians, the multi-armed Vesperans with their chittering language, and several others she couldn't immediately identify. First time on Kepler-7. The voice was deep and melodious, with an accent she didn't recognize. Jenna turned to find herself looking up at one of the most striking beings she'd ever encountered. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, with silver skin that seemed to catch and reflect the station's lights in subtle ways. His hair was white as starlight, pulled back in a complex braid, and his eyes were the deep violet of nebula gas. He wore robes that managed to look both practical and elegant, in deep blues and silver that complemented his unusual coloring. "That obvious?" she asked, hefting her tool kit higher on her shoulder. His mouth curved in what might have been a smile, revealing teeth that were perfectly white and slightly sharper than human normal. Humans tend to have a particular expression when they first experience our atmosphere mix. Also, your ship's distress beacon has been broadcasting for the last hour. Heat flushed Jenna's cheeks. She'd forgotten about the automatic beacon that activated when engine temperatures exceeded safe parameters. Great. Nothing like announcing to everyone that you're flying a piece of junk. The Zethari have a saying, he said, falling into step beside her as she headed toward what looked like a commercial district. A ship that brings you safely to port is never junk, no matter how humble its appearance. Zethari. Jenna glanced up at him. She'd heard of the species but never met one. They were supposed to be master traders, with an almost mystical understanding of commerce and negotiation. "I am Kale Vorthak," he said with a slight bow that somehow managed not to seem pretentious. "Trader and, when circumstances require, broker of difficult solutions. Jenna Torres. And if you're offering to help with difficult solutions, I might be interested. My hyperdrive's making noises that sound like a Martian deathworm with indigestion." Kale's laugh was genuinely warm. A colorful comparison. "I take it you need parts and technical assistance." "Parts, definitely. Technical assistance." She shrugged. "I've been maintaining the rust bucket myself for 3 years. I know her quirks better than anyone. They'd reached what appeared to be the station's main commercial area. Shops and service booths lined the curved walls, their holographic signs advertising everything from exotic foods to questionable entertainment. The crowd here was even more diverse, and Jenna noticed how many beings seemed to defer to Kale as they passed. Whatever his status on Kepler-7, it was clearly significant. "Your independence is admirable," Kale said, "but Zethary vessels use quantum phase hyperdrive systems. If your ship is old enough, it might have components that are compatible." Jenna stopped walking. "You'd be willing to sell me parts?" "I should warn you, my credit balance isn't exactly impressive." "Credits are not the only form of currency," Kale replied cryptically. "But first, we should examine your ship to determine exactly what is needed." Something in his tone made her study his face more carefully. The violet eyes seemed to hold depths she couldn't fathom, and there was a subtle tension in his posture that suggested more was going on than a simple commercial transaction. "What's the catch?" she asked bluntly. Kale's smile widened, showing more of those sharp teeth. "Direct. I appreciate that quality in humans. The truth is, I have been seeking passage to the Rigel sector, but my own vessel is currently unavailable. Perhaps we might reach a mutually beneficial arrangement." Before Jenna could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the docking bays. Shouts echoed through the corridors, followed by the unmistakable whine of energy weapons charging. The crowd immediately began to scatter, beings of various species pressing themselves against walls or ducking into doorways. "Pirates," someone screamed in heavily accented standard. "The Crimson Tide is boarding." Kale's expression darkened, and Jenna noticed his hand move to something concealed beneath his robes. "It seems our negotiation will have to wait," he said grimly. The lights flickered and went out, plunging the commercial district into near darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in a hellish red glow. In the distance, Jenna could hear the sound of blast doors slamming shut as the station's automated systems tried to contain the breach. "This way," Kale said, grasping her arm gently but firmly. The Crimson Tide are not known for their restraint with civilians. They moved quickly through increasingly empty corridors, heading away from the docking bays. Jenna's mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. Pirate raids weren't uncommon in the Outer Rim, but most stations had enough defenses to deter casual attacks. The fact that the Crimson Tide was willing to assault Kepler-7 suggested they were after something specific. "Where are we going?" she asked as they ducked into a maintenance shaft that seemed barely wide enough for Kale's broad shoulders. "There is a secondary docking facility on the station's dark side," he replied, his voice echoing oddly in the confined space. "If we can reach it, there may be ships available for requisition." "You mean stealing?" "I prefer emergency relocation of assets." Despite their dire situation, Jenna found herself smiling. "Has anyone ever told you that you sound like a lawyer when you talk?" "Zethary children are taught proper speech patterns from an early age," Kale said with mock dignity. "Unlike some species, we do not communicate primarily through grunts and profanity." "Hey!" Jenna protested. "I'll have you know I can express complex ideas using nothing but curse words and mechanical terminology." They emerged from the maintenance shaft into a darkened corridor lined with what appeared to be storage lockers. The emergency lighting here was sporadic, creating pools of red illumination separated by stretches of darkness. The sound of fighting seemed more distant, but the occasional tremor through the station's structure suggested the battle was far from over. Kale moved with surprising stealth for such a large being, his robes somehow managing not to rustle against the metal walls. Jenna did her best to match his quiet movement, though her heavy work boots seemed to ring against the decking with every step. They were halfway down the corridor when figures stepped out of the shadows ahead of them. Even in the dim light, the distinctive armor and weapons of the Crimson Tide were unmistakable. 3 pirates, their faces hidden behind tactical masks, with energy rifles trained on Jenna and Kale. Well, the leader said, his voice distorted by his mask's vocoder. "What have we here?" "A pretty little human and her alien boyfriend, trying to sneak away from the party." Kale raised his hands slowly, but Jenna could see tension coiling in his frame like a spring being compressed. "We are merely civilians seeking safety," he said calmly. "We have nothing of value." The pirate's laugh was ugly. "Everything has value, silver skin. Humans fetch good prices in the outer darkness, and Zethari, well, your people make excellent slaves once you break their pride." That was apparently the wrong thing to say. Kale moved with liquid speed, producing a curved blade from somewhere in his robes. The weapon seemed to glow with its own inner light as he closed the distance to the nearest pirate. The energy rifle fired, but Kale was no longer where he'd been standing. Jenna didn't hesitate. She grabbed a hydrospanner from her tool kit and threw it with all her strength at the second pirate's weapon. The heavy tool struck the rifle's barrel just as it fired, sending the energy bolt scorching harmlessly into the ceiling. The fight was brief but vicious. Kale moved like something out of a legend, his blade weaving patterns of light that seemed impossible for something so large to execute. When it was over, 3 pirates lay unconscious on the deck, and Kale was cleaning his blade on one of their cloaks. "Remind me never to make you angry," Jenna said breathlessly. Kale sheathed his weapon with fluid grace. "Zethari traders must be prepared to defend their merchandise," he said simply. "And their companions." The word companions hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than simple friendship. Jenna found herself looking at Kale with new eyes, seeing past the exotic appearance to something deeper and more complex. "We should keep moving," she said finally. "There will be more of them." They resumed their journey through the station's less traveled passages, but something had changed between them. The easy banter was replaced by a heightened awareness of each other, an electric tension that had nothing to do with their dangerous situation. When they finally reached the secondary docking facility, they found it largely abandoned. Several small craft sat on the landing pads, apparently deserted by their owners during the attack. Kale examined them quickly before settling on a sleek courier ship with Altarian markings. "This one will serve," he said, producing a small device from his robes. The ship's airlock cycled open at his touch. "Handy tool," Jenna observed. "Trade secret," Kale replied with another of those enigmatic smiles. The courier ship's interior was cramped but well appointed, clearly designed for speed rather than comfort. Kale settled into the pilot's seat with familiar ease, his long fingers dancing over controls that seemed to respond to his touch like living things. "Where exactly are we going?" Jenna asked as the ship lifted smoothly from the docking pad. "Away from here, first," Kale said, concentrating on the navigation display. "Then, perhaps we should discuss that mutually beneficial arrangement I mentioned." Through the viewport, Kepler-7 fell away beneath them, its hull scarred by weapon impacts and venting atmosphere from multiple breaches. The Crimson Tide's ships were already withdrawing, their mission apparently complete. "What do you think they were after?" Jenna asked. Kale's hand stilled on the controls. "I believe," he said slowly, "they were after me." The revelation hung between them like a live wire, crackling with implications neither of them was quite ready to explore. As their stolen ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving the chaos of Kepler-7 behind, Jenna realized that her simple need for engine repairs had just become something far more complicated. And looking at Kale's profile silhouetted against the swirling lights of hyperspace, she found herself thinking that complicated might not necessarily be a bad thing. The paint was still wet on Marcus Reed's latest creation when the security drones found him. He pressed himself against the curved wall of the ventilation shaft, listening to their mechanical whirring as they scanned the alley below. The mural he'd just finished covered 3 stories of the building's exterior, a swirling galaxy of colors that seemed to move and breathe in the neon light of Valora Prime's entertainment district. It was his best work yet, and it was completely illegal. Marcus wiped paint-stained fingers on his already colorful jacket and waited for the drones to move on. 3 months he'd been hiding on this pleasure planet, using his art to make enough credits to survive while staying one step ahead of the bounty hunters Earth had sent after him. His crime? Creating subversive imagery that undermines colonial authority. In simpler terms, he'd painted murals that showed humans and aliens living in harmony instead of the segregated society the Earth government preferred. The drones finally moved away, their search pattern taking them toward the main thoroughfare. Marcus dropped silently into the alley, gathered his supplies, and was about to slip away when he heard the voice. "It's magnificent." He spun around, spray paint canister raised like a weapon, to find himself facing the most beautiful being he'd ever seen. She stood in the shadows at the mouth of the alley, but even in the dim light, her skin seemed to glow with its own soft luminescence. The blue was unlike anything in nature he could name, deeper than Earth's oceans, richer than a clear sky, with hints of silver that shifted like moonlight on water. Her hair cascaded down her shoulders in waves of midnight black, and her eyes were large and expressive, colored the same luminous blue as her skin. She wore flowing robes that seemed to be cut from starlight itself, marking her as someone of importance in Luxari society. "You shouldn't be here," Marcus said, lowering the paint canister but not relaxing his stance. "Security patrol just swept through." "I dismissed them," she said simply, stepping closer to examine his mural. "I wanted to see this for myself." Marcus blinked. "You dismissed them? Who are you?" She turned those incredible eyes on him, and he felt something shift in his chest. "Zara Moonwhisper, cultural ambassador of the Luxari Collective. And you are the artist they call the Ghost Painter." His reputation had apparently preceded him. The locals had given him that nickname after his first few pieces appeared overnight with no witnesses. Marcus had cultivated the mystery, knowing it helped keep him alive. "Just call me Marcus," he said, studying her face for any sign of threat. "And before you ask, yes, I'm human, and yes, I'm probably violating about 6 different interspecies cultural protocols just by being here." Zara's laugh was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Only 6. You're more careful than most of your species." Despite the danger of the situation, Marcus found himself smiling. Is that supposed to be an insult or a compliment? Neither. An observation. She moved closer to the mural, her luminescent skin casting a soft blue glow on the painted surface. "Your work shows remarkable understanding of non-human aesthetic principles. This piece incorporates Altarian color theory, Vesperan geometric progression, and something that feels distinctly Luxari in its emotional resonance." Marcus stared at her. Most people saw his art as pretty colors and shapes. No one had ever analyzed the deeper cultural elements he wove into his work. "You know art," he said. "I know many things. It's my job to understand how different species express beauty, emotion, and meaning." She touched the wall gently, her fingers tracing the swirling patterns. "But I've never seen anyone combine so many traditions so seamlessly." "It's not seamless," Marcus said, moving to stand beside her. "Look here, see how the Altarian blues clash with the Luxari silver? And the Vesperan geometry is completely wrong for this scale. I'm still learning." Zara turned to look at him, and he realized how close they were standing. Her luminescence seemed brighter this close, and he caught a scent like night-blooming flowers. "You see the flaws," she said softly. "Most artists would defend their work. Most artists aren't fugitives living in ventilation shafts," Marcus replied. "When you're trying to survive, you can't afford to think your work is perfect." Something shifted in her expression, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "Why are you a fugitive? What crime could an artist commit that would make Earth hunt you across star systems?" Marcus looked back at his mural, at the swirling representation of different species dancing together in harmony. "I painted the wrong message," he said simply. Before Zara could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the main street. Marcus tensed, but she placed a restraining hand on his arm. Her touch sent warmth through him that had nothing to do with her bioluminescence. "Ambassador Moonwhisper." The voice was cultured, speaking accented standard. "The council session begins in 1 hour. A figure appeared at the mouth of the alley, another Luxari, male, with more formal robes and an expression of barely concealed disapproval. His gaze flicked between Zara and Marcus with obvious distaste. "Thank you, Selim," Zara said without moving away from Marcus. "I'll be along shortly." Selim's luminescence flickered, what Marcus was beginning to recognize as a sign of agitation in Luxari physiology. "Ambassador, the Council specifically requested you avoid contact with unregistered aliens. Especially humans." "The Council requests many things," Zara said coolly. "I'll see you at the chambers." It was clearly a dismissal. Selim's glow pulsed once more before he bowed stiffly and withdrew. Marcus waited until the footsteps faded before speaking. "Unregistered aliens?" he asked. "You don't have proper documentation to be on Velora Prime," Zara said. "Technically, I should report you to station security. But you won't." "No," she said, and there was something in her voice that made his pulse quicken. "I won't." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, studying the mural together. Finally, Marcus spoke. "This council session, it's about the trade negotiations with Earth, isn't it?" Zara's luminescence dimmed slightly. "Among other things. The Earth Colonial Authority wants exclusive trading rights in the Luxari Collective. They're offering very favorable terms. In exchange for cultural isolation protocols. No more mixed species colonies. No more artistic or cultural exchange programs. Humans stay in human space, everyone else stays in theirs." Marcus felt cold despite the warm night air. "And your people are considering this?" "Many are. The Earth government has been very persuasive about the dangers of cultural contamination. They show examples of human colonies that have deviated from acceptable norms. Like his murals, Marcus thought. Like the vision of harmony he'd been painting across a dozen worlds before they branded him a criminal. "What do you think?" he asked. Zara was quiet for a long moment. "I think," she said finally, "that beauty cannot flourish in isolation. Your art proves that. The way you blend traditions, create something new while honoring what came before, that's what culture should be. Tell that to your council." "I've been trying. For months, I've been arguing against the isolation protocols. But I'm just one voice, and Earth's economic incentives are very compelling." Marcus made a decision that he knew was probably stupid but felt absolutely right. What if you had proof? Something to show them that human-alien cultural exchange creates beauty instead of contamination? What kind of proof? He gestured at the mural. "A collaboration. You and me, creating something together. Something that shows what's possible when species work as partners instead of staying separate." Zara's eyes widened. That would be incredibly risky. If the council learned I was working with an unregistered human, especially one wanted by Earth authorities. They'd strip you of your position," Marcus finished. "I understand. It was a crazy idea." "No," Zara said firmly. "It's a brilliant idea. And worth the risk." Over the next 3 days, they met in secret locations throughout the Velora Prime's sprawling cityscape. Abandoned buildings, forgotten parks, empty storage facilities, anywhere they could work without being discovered. Marcus had expected awkwardness, the usual species barriers that made collaboration difficult. Instead, he found a creative partnership unlike anything he'd experienced. Zara's understanding of Luxari artistic principles was encyclopedic, but more than that, she had an intuitive sense of how to blend different cultural elements. Where Marcus worked with bold strokes and dramatic color, she added subtle details that made the whole piece sing. Her bioluminescence allowed her to see color spectrums he couldn't, leading to combinations that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. "How do you do that?" he asked on the second night, watching her add delicate silver tracework to a section he'd thought was finished. "Do what?" She was concentrating on a particularly complex pattern, her tongue poking out slightly in a way he found adorable. "See exactly what the piece needs. I've been staring at that section for an hour, knowing something was missing but not knowing what." She paused in her work, looking at him with those luminous eyes. Perhaps it's easier when you're looking at it with someone else's perspective. Their hands brushed as she handed him a brush, and neither of them pulled away. The contact sent warmth shooting up Marcus's arm, and he saw Zara's luminescence brighten in response. "Zara," he began, but she shook her head. "We should focus on the work," she said, but her voice was softer than before. By the third night, they'd created something extraordinary. The piece covered an entire wall of an abandoned warehouse, a swirling dance of human and Luxari artistic traditions that seemed to pulse with life. Marcus stepped back to admire their work and found Zara beside him, close enough that her luminescence painted him in soft blue light. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's us," Marcus replied, and immediately felt foolish for the sentiment. But Zara turned to look at him, and he saw his own feelings reflected in her eyes. "Marcus." This time, when their hands touched, neither of them pulled away. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking something precious. Then Zara's arms came around his neck, and the careful distance they'd been maintaining collapsed entirely. Her skin was warm against his, and he could feel the subtle pulse of bioluminescence where their bodies touched. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "This complicates everything," Zara said, but she didn't move away. "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "It does." They were still standing close together when the lights came on. Security officers surrounded them, weapons drawn, while Selim stepped through the entrance with an expression of grim satisfaction. "Ambassador Moonwhisper," he said formally, "by order of the Luxari Council, you are under arrest for violating cultural contamination protocols. The human will be turned over to Earth authorities." Marcus felt Zara tense beside him, saw her luminescence flicker with what he now recognized as anger. "On what grounds?" she demanded. "Evidence of inappropriate contact with an unregistered alien," Selim replied. "The Council has been monitoring your activities since your unauthorized departure from diplomatic quarters 3 days ago." "The art," Zara said suddenly. "What about the art?" Selim glanced dismissively at their mural. "It will be destroyed, of course. Evidence of cultural contamination." Marcus saw something change in Zara's expression, saw her luminescence shift from angry red to something much more dangerous. "No," she said quietly. "Ambassador." "I said no." Zara stepped forward, and her bioluminescence blazed so brightly that several officers raised their hands to shield their eyes. "You want to destroy something beautiful because it doesn't fit your narrow definition of cultural purity. You want to lock us all away in separate boxes, never touching, never growing, never creating anything new. The protocols exist for good reason. The protocols exist because you're afraid." Zara's voice rang through the warehouse. "Afraid that if we actually work together, we might create something better than what we have alone." She gestured at the mural, her luminescence casting dancing shadows on the painted surface. "Look at it, Selim. Really look. It's not human art or Luxari art, it's something new. Something that could only exist because we chose to work together instead of staying apart." For a moment, Marcus thought she'd gotten through to him. Selim's gaze lingered on the mural, and his expression seemed to soften slightly. Then his luminescence steadied, and his face closed off again. "Contamination," he said firmly. "Destroy it." One of the officers raised his weapon, but before he could fire, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed, and a voice echoed from the communication system. "All security personnel report to docking bays 7 through 12. We have unauthorized departures in progress. Repeat, unauthorized departures." In the confusion that followed, Marcus grabbed Zara's hand. "Trust me," he said, and pulled her toward a maintenance hatch he'd spotted earlier. They crawled through the station's service tunnels while chaos erupted around them. The unauthorized departures turned out to be a mass exodus, dozens of ships fleeing the Lower Prime as news of the cultural isolation protocol spread. Apparently, not everyone was happy about the new restrictions. They emerged in a small docking bay where a battered cargo ship was preparing for departure. The pilot, a gruff-looking Eltarian, looked up as they approached. "You two looking for passage?" he asked. "Because I'm leaving now, before they lock down all the ports." Marcus looked at Zara. "Where would we go?" Her luminescence had dimmed to a soft, steady glow. "Anywhere they'll let us create art together," she said. They were almost to the ship when Selim appeared behind them, alone this time, his weapon lowered. "Zara," he called. "Don't do this. Come back with me. The council might show mercy if you cooperate." She turned to face him, and Marcus saw something in her expression that he recognized, the same determination he'd felt when he first picked up a spray can to paint his vision of a better world. "The council wants to build walls," she said. "Marcus and I want to build bridges. I know which future I'd rather live in." Selim's luminescence flickered with what might have been sadness. "You'll be exiles. Criminals. Is it worth it?" Zara looked at Marcus, then back at their abandoned mural, visible through the warehouse windows. Even from this distance, it seemed to glow with inner light. "Ask me in a few years," she said, and took Marcus's hand as they boarded the ship. As Valora Prime fell away beneath them, Marcus found himself thinking about the mural they'd left behind. Selim might destroy it, but the idea behind it, the proof that beauty could emerge from cooperation, that would survive. "So," Zara said, settling beside him in the cargo hold, "where does a fugitive artist go to find work?" Marcus smiled, squeezing her luminous hand. "I hear the Outer Rim colonies are always looking for someone to brighten up their walls." "Together?" she asked. "Together," he confirmed, and kissed her as their stolen ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying them toward whatever future they would create side by side. The shadow's edge screamed through the atmosphere of Ethros like a falling star, trailing smoke and sparks from her failing engines. Dante Cross fought the controls with everything he had, but the ship was dying beneath him. Warning klaxons blared as system after system went critical, painting his sweat-streaked face in angry red light. "Come on, baby," he muttered through gritted teeth. "Don't quit on me now." The planet below was supposed to be uninhabited, a garden world in the restricted ethereal reach, forbidden to most spacefaring species by ancient treaties. But uninhabited was exactly what Dante needed right now. 3 systems back, he'd made the mistake of trying to smuggle medical supplies through consortium space. The cargo was legitimate, bound for plague-stricken colonies in the Outer Rim, but the paperwork wasn't. Now half the sector's patrol ships were hunting him. The shadow's edge bucked and shuddered as she hit the thicker atmosphere. Through the viewport, Dante caught glimpses of a world that looked like paradise, crystal-clear lakes, forests of silver trees, mountains that seemed to glow with their own inner light. It was beautiful, peaceful, and completely off-limits. Perfect for a crash landing. The ship's final moments were a controlled catastrophe. Dante managed to avoid the largest trees, skimmed across a pristine lake that steamed where the hot hull touched water, and finally slammed into a meadow of what looked like luminescent grass. The impact threw him against his restraints hard enough to see stars, and then everything went dark. When consciousness returned, the first thing Dante noticed was the silence. No engine noise, no life support hum, no electronic beeping. Just the gentle sound of wind through alien trees and something else, a soft, melodious humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The second thing he noticed was the pain. His left arm hung at an unnatural angle, and something warm was trickling down the side of his face. The third thing was the smell, not the acrid tang of burned electronics he'd expected, but something like spring flowers and morning rain. Dante forced his eyes open and immediately wondered if he was dreaming. The shadow's edge had come to rest in a clearing surrounded by the most beautiful forest he'd ever seen. The trees were tall and graceful, with bark that seemed to be made of polished silver and leaves that glowed with soft, shifting colors. The grass beneath the ship pulsed gently with bioluminescent patterns, as if the very ground was alive. And standing beside his pilot's chair was the most ethereal being he'd ever encountered. She was tall and slender, with translucent skin that seemed to contain galaxies of tiny stars. Her hair flowed around her shoulders like liquid moonlight, and her eyes were the deep blue-green of ocean depths. She wore simple robes that looked like they'd been woven from mist and starlight, and when she moved, she seemed to float rather than walk. "You're awake," she said, and her voice was like music made audible. I was beginning to worry. Dante tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through his arm and shoulder, and the world tilted alarmingly. Gentle hands pressed him back into his seat. "Don't move yet," she said. "Your injuries are significant, but not life-threatening. I've done what I can, but the healing takes time." He looked down at his arm and blinked in surprise. The break was still there, but the pain had dulled to a manageable ache. More importantly, the wound on his head had stopped bleeding, and he could feel a strange tingling sensation wherever her hands had touched him. "You're ethereal," he said, not really a question. He'd heard stories about the mysterious species that inhabited the restricted worlds, but he'd never expected to meet one. She nodded, settling gracefully beside his chair. "I am Nick Starweaver, guardian of this grove. And you are a very long way from where you should be, pilot." "Dante Cross," he replied automatically. "And yeah, I'm definitely not supposed to be here. Neither is my ship." He gestured weakly at the shadow's edge, which looked like a metallic insult to the pristine beauty around them. "The forbidden zones exist for good reason," Nick said, but her tone was curious rather than accusatory. "Your species and mine have very different ways of interacting with the universe. Contact between us has historically been problematic." Dante had heard those stories too. Ethereals were supposed to be dangerous to other species, their very presence causing madness or death in those unprepared for their otherworldly nature. But sitting here with Nyx, all he felt was a sense of profound peace and the lingering warmth of her healing touch. "You don't seem very dangerous," he said. Something that might have been a smile flickered across her features. "Perhaps you are more resilient than most. Or perhaps the stories are not entirely accurate." Over the following hours, as Nyx worked to repair the worst of his injuries, Dante learned more about the ethereal reach than most outsiders ever would. Nyx was what her people called a life tender, someone who could sense and manipulate the vital forces that flowed through all living things. The grove where they'd crashed was her responsibility, hundreds of species of plants and animals that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. "It's incredible," Dante said, watching her coax a damaged tree back to health with nothing but touch and will. The bark knitted itself together under her fingers, and new leaves unfurled in spirals of green and gold. "How do you do it?" "All life is connected," Nyx explained, her hands still glowing with soft light as she worked. "I simply help that connection flow more freely. Your species calls it magic, but it's no more magical than the way your heart beats or your lungs breathe. Can you teach it?" She paused in her work, those ocean-deep eyes focusing on him with new intensity. "Why would you want to learn?" Dante thought about the medical supplies in his cargo hold, about the plague-stricken colonies he'd been trying to reach before the patrol ships found him. "Where I come from, healing is technology. Machines and medicines and surgical procedures. But they're not enough. There are too many worlds, too many people who need help. If there was another way." Nyx was quiet for a long moment. "Your people fear us," she said finally. "They believe our gifts are dangerous, that exposure to our abilities will somehow corrupt or destroy those who witness them." "Maybe some do," Dante admitted. "But I've seen enough of the galaxy to know that fear usually comes from misunderstanding. And right now, you're the only reason I'm still alive." She smiled then, a real smile that made her entire face light up with inner radiance. "You are not what I expected from a human pilot." "What did you expect?" "Someone less open. Less willing to see beauty in things that are different." She moved closer, and Dante caught that springflower scent again. "Your species has a reputation for being rigid in your thinking, quick to judge what you don't understand." "Some of us are," Dante said. "But some of us aren't. Just like any species, I imagine." They spent the next 3 days together while Nyx worked on healing his injuries and Dante tried to repair his ship. The Shadow's Edge had suffered more damage than he'd initially realized: fried navigation systems, a cracked hyperdrive manifold, and a hull breach that would require materials he didn't have. But as frustrating as the situation was, Dante found himself reluctant to leave. Watching Nyx tend to her grove was like watching poetry in motion. She spoke to the plants as if they were old friends, coaxed injured animals back to health with gentle words and glowing touches, and moved through the forest with a grace that made everything else seem clumsy and harsh by comparison. "You love it here," he said on the third evening, as they sat beside a stream that ran with water so pure it seemed to glow in the starlight. "This grove has been my home for longer than you've been alive," Nyx replied. "Every tree, every flower, every creature, they're all part of me, and I'm part of them." "How long have you been alive?" She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Time moves differently for my people. What you call centuries, we experience as seasons. I've tended this grove through the rise and fall of stellar empires, watched your species take its first tentative steps into space, seen entire worlds born and die." The weight of that perspective should have been overwhelming, but somehow it wasn't. Instead, Dante found himself feeling privileged to share even a small part of such an existence. "Don't you get lonely?" he asked. Nyx's luminescence dimmed slightly. "Sometimes. My people value solitude, but complete isolation can be difficult. We're meant to be connected to life, and that includes the lives of other sentient beings. Is that why you helped me? Connection?" She turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw something he recognized, the same loneliness he'd felt during long months of solo flights between distant stars. "Perhaps," she said softly. "Or perhaps I simply couldn't bear to watch someone die when I had the power to prevent it." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of engines. Dante was on his feet instantly, every instinct screaming danger. Through the canopy of silver trees, he could see lights descending, multiple ships, moving in the coordinated pattern of a military search formation. "Patrol ships," he said grimly. "They've found me." Nyx rose beside him, her translucence flickering with agitation. "They cannot be allowed to land here. This grove is sacred, protected by treaties that predate your confederation." "Tell that to the bounty hunters," Dante said, moving toward his ship. "They're not exactly known for respecting interstellar law." He managed 3 steps before the pain in his still-healing arm brought him up short. Nyx was beside him instantly, her hands glowing as she eased the worst of it. "You're not ready for a fight," she said firmly. "Then we run," Dante replied. "Is there somewhere we can hide until they leave?" Nyx shook her head. "They will scan the entire area. Your ship's signature is too distinctive to mask." She paused, her expression becoming distant as if she were listening to something he couldn't hear. "Unless." "Unless what?" She looked at him with an expression that was part fear, part determination. "My people have abilities your species doesn't understand. I could hide us both, make it so the scanners can't detect your ship or our presence. But the process would require intimate contact. A joining of life forces that would be considered taboo by both our peoples." Dante didn't hesitate. "Do it. You don't understand what you're agreeing to. The joining would create a permanent bond between us. You would be able to sense what I sense, feel what I feel. And I would be connected to your thoughts, your emotions, your very essence. It cannot be undone." The ships were closer now, their searchlights beginning to sweep the forest. Dante could hear voices on calm frequencies, coordinating their search pattern. "Nyx," he said, taking her luminous hands in his. "I've spent my whole life running from one thing or another. Bad choices, worse consequences, people who wanted to hurt me or use me. But these last 3 days with you, they're the most peaceful I've ever felt. If being bonded to you means I get to keep feeling that way, then I can't think of anything I'd want more." Her eyes widened, and her luminescence brightened to match the intensity of her emotions. "Dante. Besides, he added with a crooked smile, someone needs to teach me how to heal people with my bare hands. I've got medical supplies to deliver once we get out of this. The first searchlight swept across the clearing, illuminating the shadow's edge in harsh white light. Nyx stepped closer to Dante, her hands rising to frame his face. "Close your eyes," she whispered. "And don't resist what you feel." The joining was unlike anything Dante had ever experienced. It started as warmth where Nyx touched him, then spread through his entire being like gentle fire. He felt her presence in his mind, not intrusive or overwhelming, but like a harmony he hadn't known he was missing. Through her senses, he could feel the life force of every plant and animal in the grove, could sense the natural rhythms of the planet itself. And wrapping around all of it was Nyx herself, her compassion, her strength, her deep and abiding love for the living world around her. But threaded through it all was something new, something that made his breath catch in his throat. She loved him too. The realization came with the bond, as natural as breathing. This ethereal being who had lived for centuries, who tended an entire grove with the devotion of a goddess, had fallen in love with a smuggler pilot with a broken ship and a criminal record. When the searchlight swept the clearing again, they found nothing but empty forest. The shadow's edge sat in the same place, but somehow the eyes of the hunters slid right past it. The ship circled the area for another hour before finally moving on, their crews convinced they'd been chasing shadows. As the sound of engines faded into the distance, Dante opened his eyes to find Nyx watching him with an expression of wonder. "How do you feel?" she asked. Dante took inventory. The pain in his arm was completely gone, but more than that, he felt complete. As if a part of him he hadn't known was missing had finally been found. "Like I've been living half a life until now," he said honestly. Through their bond, he felt Nyx's relief and joy. "I was afraid you would regret it," she admitted. "The joining is permanent. You'll never be fully human again." Dante looked around the grove with new eyes. He could see the life force flowing through every living thing, could sense the delicate balance that Nyx worked tirelessly to maintain. And underlying it all was the warm certainty of their connection, two souls that had found each other across the vast loneliness of space. "Regret it?" He pulled her closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. "Nyx, I've been a pilot for 15 years, and I've never had a home. Just ships and temporary ports and the space between stars. But this feels like home." She smiled, and in that smile he saw his own future, not the rootless existence of a smuggler, but something deeper and more meaningful. Through their bond, he understood that she would come with him. Her grove would endure without her for a while, tended by the automated systems her people had developed over millennia. And together, they would carry healing to the worlds that needed it most. "The medical supplies in your cargo hold," she said, confirming his thoughts. "There are worlds where conventional medicine has failed." "Dozens of them," Dante confirmed. "Plagues, genetic disorders, conditions that our technology can't touch. But with your abilities." "Our abilities," she corrected gently. "The bond works both ways, Dante. You'll be able to channel life force the way I do, though it will take time to fully develop the skill." They spent the next week preparing for departure. Nyx gathered seeds and cuttings from her grove, creating a portable garden that could grow in the shadow's edge's cargo bay. She taught Dante the basics of life force manipulation, helping him understand how to sense and guide the energy that flowed through all living things. "It's not about imposing your will," she explained as they worked together to heal a bird with a broken wing. "It's about asking the body to remember how to be whole, then giving it the energy to make that memory real." Under Dante's inexperienced touch, the bird's wing mended slowly but surely. When they released it back into the forest, watching it spiral up into the silver canopy, Dante felt a satisfaction deeper than anything he'd experienced as a pilot. "We're going to change things," he said, pulling Nyx close. "Yes," she agreed, her luminescence pulsing in sync with his heartbeat. "We are." The shadow's edge lifted off from Ethros 3 days later, her cargo hold filled with medical supplies and living plants, her crew expanded from 1 to 2. As the planet fell away beneath them, Dante felt a pang of loss for the peaceful grove they were leaving behind. Through their bond, Nyx sensed his emotion. "It's not goodbye," she said softly. "The grove will always be part of us, just as we'll always be part of it. And someday, when our work is done, we'll return." "Our work," Dante repeated, liking the sound of that. The first world they visited was Kepler 3, a mining colony ravaged by a respiratory plague that had killed thousands. The colonists were suspicious of alien intervention at first, but when Nyx and Dante began healing the sick with nothing but touch and will, suspicion gave way to gratitude. "How is this possible?" the colony's chief medical officer asked, watching a child's fever break under Nyx's gentle hands. "Life wants to be whole," Nyx explained. "Sometimes it just needs help remembering how." From Kepler 3, they traveled to the agricultural world of Demeter's garden, where a genetic blight was destroying crops faster than conventional treatments could stop it. Working together, Dante and Nyx taught the plants to resist the disease, showing local farmers how to encourage their crops' natural defenses. Then to the research station at Proxima Base, where an experimental virus had escaped containment and infected half the staff. The station's automated systems had quarantined the facility, trapping the healthy with the sick. Dante and Nyx slipped past the blockade and spent 2 weeks healing everyone they could find, their bond allowing them to work with a precision and coordination that amazed the survivors. With each world they visited, each life they saved, the legend grew. The healer's ship, some called them. The bonded pair. The bridge between worlds. But to Dante and Nyx, they were simply partners in the truest sense, two souls sharing one purpose, bringing healing to a galaxy that desperately needed it. Months passed, then years. The Shadow's Edge became a mobile clinic, traveling from world to world wherever disease and suffering called. Dante's piloting skills kept them ahead of the authorities who still considered him a criminal, while Nyx's healing abilities saved lives that conventional medicine couldn't touch. And through it all, their bond grew stronger. Not just the mystical connection that let them share thoughts and emotions, but the deeper love that came from sharing a life of purpose. They worked together, lived together, grew together in ways that transcended the boundaries between species. "Do you ever regret it?" Dante asked one evening as they sat in their ship's observation lounge, watching a binary star system paint the cosmos in shades of gold and crimson. "Leaving your grove, bonding with a human criminal, spending your life in a cramped spaceship." Nyx curled closer to him, her luminescence creating a warm glow in the darkened compartment. Through their bond, he felt her absolute contentment, her joy in their shared existence. "Regret loving you?" she asked, pressing a kiss to his jaw. "Regret the thousands of lives we've saved, the bridges we've built between our peoples? Regret finding my true home in your arms instead of a grove on a distant world?" She pulled back to look at him, her ocean-deep eyes reflecting the light of distant stars. "Never," she said firmly. "This is what I was meant for, Dante. Not tending trees in isolation, but healing the wounds between worlds. Showing the galaxy that love can bloom between any two souls brave enough to reach for it." Dante kissed her then, pouring all his gratitude and love into the connection they shared. Outside the viewport, the stars wheeled in their ancient dance, but inside the Shadow's Edge, two hearts beat as one, carrying hope and healing to whatever corner of the galaxy needed them most. Their love had become more than romance, it was a bridge between worlds, a testament to the power of connection over isolation, healing over harm. And in a universe that too often forgot the importance of both, that was perhaps the greatest miracle of all. Together, they flew toward their next destination, their next chance to prove that love could indeed transcend any boundary the cosmos might place between souls meant to find each other.